you'll see some legal battles. Okay, Arizona at this point with 88% reporting, Biden leads by 69,000. Yes.
I heard that for Michigan, like the reason why they did it in the lawsuit was because the mail-in ballots had statistical anomaly levels of Biden.
Okay.
Like less than 1 Trump vote per 1,000, 10,000.
Right. Right. Pennsylvania. Okay, I'm not doing this. All right. Hey, go to page 60. Okay, so the plan today is to finish the notes or get close to, and tomorrow I'll be doing review and finishing notes if we don't finish them today. Okay. So after today's lecture, you will be able to do the homework on page 61 if you choose. Okay. All right. So you guys have been introduced to federalism just as a definition or a system of government that shares or divides power between national, state, and local governments, right? Okay, so we're going to dig into that quite a bit more, okay? This, I'm just reading from the top of this. This means that in the United States, some powers may belong only to the national government, while others may belong only to state and local governments. Likewise, some powers are shared by national, state, and local governments, while still others are denied to either the national, state, or local governments. As you've seen in the arguments of the Founding Fathers, there are many supporters of the idea of strong national government, but few want to see a powerful central government usurp and abuse the powers of state and local governments, okay? And this is the reason we don't use a unitary system, but rather a federal system, and not a confederal system, because that didn't work out for us, okay? So when we look at national powers, there's several different types, okay? Really three main types of powers. You have inherent powers that belong just naturally to any sovereign government, okay? So immigration is something that any government would have. The power to acquire territory, any government. To grant and receive diplomatic recognition. What that means is, guys, the U.S. government can recognize another state or another country as a legitimate government or not. So let's say in recent years, we had a situation in Honduras where there was somewhat of a coup, and the United States refused to give diplomatic recognition to that government. Same thing happened in Egypt a few years ago when the army basically overthrew, the Muslim Brotherhood that had been elected there. And since it was a military coup, under U.S. law, we did not recognize that new government, okay? There are times, like with Cuba, guys, where we, for 50 years, basically had a trade embargo, did not have any really diplomatic relations with Cuba. North Korea for many years was like that, okay? So that's something that is inherent to a government, and stopping rebellion, etc., okay? Now, when we look at express powers, guys, the important thing here is it's actually written in the Constitution and plainly stated express power, okay? So you can look at each of the articles, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and find express powers. I have a few here in Article 1, which obviously deals with the legislative branch, okay? So establish uniform rules or laws for naturalization. That's for immigration, people becoming citizens, and bankruptcy. Only the national government can print money, punish counterfeiting. Guys, usually when it's counterfeiting, what part of the government usually gets involved? You know what agency deals with that?
The IRA.
The Secret Service. So, like, if you're passing counterfeit currency, you'll get a visit from the Secret Service if they catch you. Okay. establish post offices and postal roads. Okay, so for postal roads, that really is for the interstate highway system. Okay. Copyright and patent laws, which we'll talk about more later. Regulate interstate and international trade. So if trade goes from one state to another, the legislative branch has the power to regulate that. To make treaties, conduct foreign policy. Okay, the Senate must approve treaties. Declare war, only Congress can do that. To raise, maintain, make rules for government and land and naval forces, and to exercise exclusive legislative authority over the District of Columbia. This is an interesting one. What is the highest elected office in the District of Columbia? I mean, they have a local government there in DC. The mayor. Okay, the mayor, and then they have a city council in DC. Okay. But there have been times where the U.S. Congress has taken over running the city, like the Washington, D.C. public school system, which is among the most struggling in our nation. Have at point the U.S. Congress taking over running the schools, okay, which is in their authority, okay, in the Constitution. All right, now this is where things get gray and fuzzy, okay, and that's with what are called implied powers, not expressly stated, but are reasonable to fulfilling the express powers. This we find the necessary and proper clause, okay. Now, this has a nickname, the necessary and proper clause, because it stretches the authority of the government, the national government. It stretches the authority. The necessary and proper clause is known as the what clause? Elastic clause. Did you catch the hint there? Stretches the authority. Okay. And this is what it says: to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all the other powers vested in this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department thereof. Okay, just let me give you a slight example. Okay, so the elastic clause. Let's say Congress passes a law that says there needs to be railroad signs anywhere there's an intersection between a road and a railroad. Okay. Now, they passed this law. Okay. So does that mean we have to have gates at every intersection? Okay. So this is passed by Congress. And who carries out the law? It's going to go over the executive branch and probably be sent to the Department of Transportation. And the people that work in the Department of Transportation are going to write the specifics about how this is to be carried out. Okay, so if there are 500 plus cars that pass through that intersection a day, you need a gate that comes down when the train's coming. Okay, if it's less than that, then maybe you just have a sign with flashing lights, ding, 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 ding. Okay, so this was not in the law, but they are creating laws with this, or regulations with it. Okay, this kind of stretches the authority of government. Okay, and allows them to do their job more efficiently. Now, there are some powers that are denied to the national government. Article 1, Section 9 says they cannot suspend habeas corpus except in times of national crisis. No ex post facto laws. Okay, so you know how they changed the tobacco age to 21, right? So if somebody found out that you had been smoking cigarettes at 18 before that law was passed, Could they fine you for that? No, that would be retroactive. Okay, this prevents government from passing laws to punish people for something that was done before the law was passed. That make sense? Can't do that. Bills of attainder are not allowed, which declare an individual guilty of a capital offense without trial. Cannot impose taxes on exports. That's good. That's in the Constitution because if it exists, Congress likes to tax it. Give preference to any state over another state in matters of regulation or revenue, or tax any vessel bound to or from one state to another. Okay, that's nice. We have that in there. Now, this is interesting. One of the things about federalism, guys, one of the ways the government gets what it wants, the national government, is what is called federal mandates. Okay? So as I just mentioned, the tobacco age, okay, that is a national law. Is that an A? Okay. Drinking age are state laws. There's 50 of those. Okay, there's one here. Okay. Now, back in the 1980s, when I was 17 years old, the drinking age was 18 in the state I lived in, which was Florida. This was in 1985. Okay. And the federal government said to the states, we are mandating that if you do not change your drinking age to 21 in your state, the U.S. government is not going to use tax dollars and send them to you for transportation. So if you don't comply with this mandate, you don't get transportation money from the federal government. Yeah.
So it's literally a bribe for the federal government.
You could call it a bribe. Yes. Now, one state chose not to follow this mandate for a while, and that was Louisiana. Okay. You've all heard of Bourbon Street down in Nolens? Heard of that? Okay. They thought they could get more revenue from young people traveling to Nolens and partying than from transportation dollars coming from the national government. Now, this says that cannot give preference to any state over another state in matters of regulation of commerce or revenue. Now, obviously, the Supreme Court did not strike down this because the federal government does this all the time. To get states to do what they want, they hold the carrot, the money, over their head and say, if you want this money, follow our regulations. Okay, they do this in education as well, for federal money for education. They say, if you want this money, you will implement No Child Left Behind. You will implement Race to the Top. Okay? Which were both really bad educational ideas. Okay? But states want the money. So they comply. Okay? I'll be talking more about that in a minute. Okay? Use money from the Treasury without the passage or approval of an appropriations bill. Okay? As we'll learn in the legislative branch, anytime they're going to spend money, it's got to go through appropriations. Okay? Which basically, when you hear appropriations, think funding. And they can't grant titles of nobility. Okay? So state powers are reinforced by the 10th Amendment. Okay? Powers not delegated to the United States, that's the U.S. government by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Those are reserved powers. Okay? So turn the page. So states typically have the power to issue licenses. So whether that's to be a doctor, a teacher, a real estate agent, Marriage licenses, driver's licenses, death certificates are all issued by states. Okay? Power to regulate intra-state, within a state business. That's left up to the states. Okay? Now, there are powers that are denied to the states, and this is probably a good idea, some of these. Okay? So Kansas cannot enter into a treaty or an alliance with other states, okay, or with foreign governments. Okay? Now, they can work together with other states, but it can't be like a treaty with another state. Okay? So Kansas can't enter a treaty with Mexico. All right? Declare war. Kansas cannot declare war on Mexico or Canada or anybody else. Okay? And maintain a standing army. Now, the National Guard, the Kansas National Guard, okay, is trained, funded by the national government. Okay? They can be used by the governors of those states, the National Guard, okay, in emergency situations. Okay? Whether that be a riot or a big tornado or something that comes through, the National Guard can be mobilized.
Tornado?
Yeah, so like Greensburg tornado a few years ago, the National Guard was called in to help with that.
Oh, just clean up.
Yeah.
I thought they were like
Or save lives, or try and. Yeah. Kansas can't print its own money, or pass ex post facto laws that we talked about, or issue bills of attainder. Interfere in an obligation of a contract. States can't grant titles of mobility, impose import or export duties. That was a big one. And enter into alliance with another state, foreign power, engage in war unless actually invaded, or in such imminent danger that an immediate armed response was necessary. Okay. Now this one came up a little bit during the Obama years in Arizona. Okay, with the border. Okay, and guys, immigration is a federal issue. States are not allowed to enforce immigration. Okay, and that's been ferreted out through the courts. But Arizona felt like the national government wasn't doing a job securing the border, and obviously many states are affected by illegal immigration. So Arizona the governor started having police ask people, if they were citizens, and they're not allowed to do that. Okay, without them committing a crime. Okay, if somebody's arrested for committing a crime, they can find out whether they're here legally or not. Okay, but the court had to step in and tell Arizona you can't, your local police can't do this. Okay, it's a federal issue. Concurrent powers. Okay, these are powers that both sides have, right? So both the national government and state governments can collect taxes, build roads, operate courts of law, and borrow money. Okay, so the homework assignment there on page 61 is kind of handy. Now I want to show you, I'm going to pull up some notes that I use for my regular class. I do a whole chapter on this. My mouse quit working, which stinks. So I don't want you to write these down. I'll tell you what to write down. Just don't, when I put these notes up, don't just start copying, okay? Because I'm not going to spend that much time on each slide. Okay, so guys, the issue of federalism goes back right to the beginning of the country. Okay, you have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, right? You remember what they stood for. Were you better for this next test? Okay, so the Federalists support a stronger national government. The Anti-Federalists were worried that the national government would become too strong. Yes, the president would become like a king. The Federalists countered, well, checks and balances prevent that from happening. Okay, and Bill of Rights was a big issue with that as well. And obviously, the Anti-Federalists won that argument. Okay, so let me just read through this. Now, federalism, to bring a little bit of Catholic teaching in here, Some of you have probably heard of subsidiarity. You heard of that in the church? Okay. Basically what that means, wherever the problem, whoever is closest to the problem solves the problem or tries to solve the problem. Does that make sense? And that's the way the Catholic Church operates, through subsidiarity. Same thing, similar with federalism, right? So do you want the people in your local community to solve problems, or do you want people in Washington, D.C. to solve your problem? Well, generally, people that are closer to the problem understand the problem maybe a little bit better, okay? And you have more voices involved in that rather than, say 435 people in the House, 535 in Congress. You can have more people involved in that decision, okay? So what we see here in the 20th century, guys, this is really, that's something that's really changed since the 1970s. We've seen a massive change here, okay? So jobs once handled by states are now aided by the feds. Now, this is pretty simple stuff. So when BTK was going on, right, when he was committing his crime, the FBI came in and helped out with that, okay? Now, there are times where the KBI, you guys know what the KBI? Yeah. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation, right? We have one of those in Kansas. Help the FBI out with certain, investigations and so forth. So it's something that they help share in, okay? Sometimes the money, well, this is what I already talked about with National Guard units. The federal government trains and funds those units, okay? This is what I want you to write down, revenue sharing, okay? Now, this really began in the 1970s, okay? So under revenue sharing, states had a great deal of freedom. So, okay, let me talk about this term revenue sharing, okay? Some companies that you may go work for, if you go work for a big corporation, sometimes they reward employees with what's called revenue sharing. Okay, so let's say the company has a record year of profits and they want to reward the employees. They may give the employees a bonus called revenue sharing. Okay. Sometimes companies will allow, if they're a publicly traded company, they will allow the employees to buy the stock of that company at a cheaper rate than buying it on the market. Okay, so immediately, if Boeing says we're going to allow you to buy Boeing shares, employees, and they say it's trading at $50 a share, we're going to allow you to buy Boeing stock at $30 a share, well, you're making $20 a share off the bat. Does that make sense? That's the type of revenue sharing that companies do. Now, the federal government started doing this with the states. Okay. Now, I'm going to use an analogy here. It's a little odd analogy. Okay. But I want you to think of this money that the federal government was sharing with the states as crack. Crack is a drug. Crack kills. Don't do crack. Okay. But crack is highly addictive, yes? So you give the states, hey, I got some money here. Here, try this out. It's free. Take it. You like it? Tastes good, right? Now, what's the state going to do with this money? With this revenue sharing? Well, the state could hire more police officers. The state could hire more teachers. Okay, the state could invest in new roads or bridges. With this revenue, they can use the money for whatever they want. And they like it. It's like free money. Okay? Now, if you do hire new teachers with this money, what happens next year when you're still trying to pay those teachers? If the revenue sharing's not there next year, do you have the money to continue to pay for these programs? No. So now that I've got you addicted to the crack, now I'm going to make you follow some of my rules in order to get the crack. There's your bribery. Okay? So what'll begin to happen, guys, over time, this is going to change. Okay? There was a lot of pressure. The national budget was, we were starting to run deficits, bigger deficits in the 80s. Okay? Nothing like we see today, by the way. The deficits we've seen in the last 10 years are way bigger than what we saw in the 80s. Okay? We're talking about a couple $100 billion in the 80s, maybe $100 billion. Now we speak in trillions. Okay? So, pressure to cut federal spending, they started changing how they do this. And they're going to start calling them grants instead of revenue sharing. Okay? Grants. So write down grants. Now, in order to get these grants, you got to follow certain rules. Okay? Now, you don't have to write all this down. Okay? This is just some examples here. Okay? Grants and aid, money or other resources the federal government provides for state and local activities. It's a grant. Okay? Now, these are used for specific projects authorized by the federal government. So if you want the money, you got to use it on this. So they're telling you where to use the money. Okay. Now, going back in history, there's some of this. Okay. Once we hit the 70s, it really increases. Okay. So land ordinance 1785 sets aside lands for public schools. Okay. And you see that, like Northwest, that big piece of property that Northwest is, or Wilbur. Okay, although Wilbur used to be Madonna, right? You guys know that? That was an all-girls school over there, and this is Notre Dame. Madonna, Notre Dame, okay? And there's a tunnel that goes underneath the ground from Bishop Carroll to...
Oh, we gotta go check this out.
No.
Flying. Like the swimming pool in the cave.
Hey, there is a swimming pool.
Under the cave floor? Yeah.
There is. You know that?
You didn't know that? Yeah. Used to be a swimming pool. I got some beachfront property in Arizona for you. Yeah.
Ashley,
Don't worry, you just need like a small portion of water, and then you can call it a beach crust. It's all surrounded by sand.
Lake Powell. Okay. The Morrill Act. You may have studied this your junior year. These set up A&M universities, set aside land. What does A&M stand for?
Agriculture and agriculture and
McDonald's.
no mechanics.
Avionics and
Mechanics.
Mechanics.
There we go. Agriculture and mechanics.
Which means what?
Like
In a modern sense.
like engineering.
Engineering.
Yeah.
What is K-State known for?
Engineering.
And
Veterinarian.
Architect.
And agriculture.
Oh.
K-State was actually one of the first, if not the first, university set up by the Morrill Act. Okay. You don't need to know that for the test. Okay. So transportation housing. Okay. Now, let me pull that back. Okay. This is federal grants to state and local governments, 1960 to 2017. Okay. This is just kind of showing you how much it's grown. Okay. So if we go back to 1960, total amount. Okay. We've got payments for individuals, tends to be welfare. Okay. The remainder, capital investment. So that would be like transportation, public education, whether it be at the collegiate level or state level, okay, local level, okay. So we went from 45 billion to 541 billion, which, guys, as I'm about to show you, is going to show you that the states are becoming more and more dependent on the federal government for their subsistence. Okay. There's another graph there. Oops. Let me go back one. Okay. write this down, categorical grant. It's in there. Okay, categorical grant. Payments to carry out very specific activities, okay? So somebody in Washington says, you know, we really need to fix our airports, okay? And so the money can only be spent on airports, okay? Unemployment compensation, fighting crime. That actually might be a little bit too broad for categorical. National disaster aid. Okay, so if you ever hear, you know, like with the forest fires in California, okay, a natural disaster declaration is made, federal government kicks in, starts sending money. Okay, hurricanes, tornadoes, so forth. Okay, now the amount of money you get, say for airports, will be based on the population of your state. So the more people you have in your state, the more money you get. Okay. Now, typically, they require states to contribute some of their own funds as well. Okay, so let's say the money is for airports. Okay, and our airports are in pretty good shape. But let's say there's $5 billion that the federal government is saying, Kansas, you are eligible for $5 billion for airports, okay? However, if you want this money, you can only use it on airports, and what are you going to have to do? Contribute some of your own funds. Now, the state of Kansas collects taxes, okay, and from us, and then they spend it. Who gets to decide how that money is spent in the state of Kansas? The state legislature, yes? Or the governor, working with the governor, yes? So Kansas collects our money, the state legislature chooses how to spend it. They pass the laws, appropriate the money, okay? So the Kansas legislature is being told that if the state wants this money, they're going to have to contribute $1 billion of their own money to get the $5 billion. Follow me? Yeah.
That almost makes a lot of sense. They don't really need to renovate their airports. They're spending $1 billion they could have been spending on roads and stuff. Give $5 billion is pretty much useless money.
I didn't say it made sense. Okay? I'm saying that's how it works. So instead of the people we elected, the state legislature, getting to decide where our money's going, who's deciding where our money's going? The federal government is. You guys following this? Okay, so you're taking away power from the states, their autonomy to decide how they spend their own money through these grants. Okay? Now, categorical grants are very specific. Okay? Then we have another type of grant. Called block grants. Write that down. So these can be used in a more broadly defined area. Okay? Which states tend to prefer these. Gives them more flexibility. Okay? So if you say welfare, health, and education, well, you could do a lot of different things with that, right? You could do after-school programs for kids, okay? You could set up a health clinic in a poor area, okay? Anti-crime measures. So think block, think broad, okay? Okay, this is just, this graph starts in 1981 and goes to 2007, okay? Now, this is before Obamacare was passed, okay? And I'm just gonna show you different segments of the economy here and kind of follow along. This is Health and Human Services, okay? You can see an increase here from about 48 billion to 250 billion. Transportation started here in about 23 billion. Went down some during the 80s. That was Reagan, okay? And then we get to the 90s, we see more and more money coming for transportation, okay? Upwards of close to 50 billion, okay? Housing and urban development. Agriculture is something that's remained constant through the Farm Bill for farmers since the Great Depression. We've had to help farmers. We've tried to help farmers. Education's an interesting one. You drop down to about here 7 to 8 billion. Okay, you get No Child Left Behind in the year 2000. Okay, if I can follow this one here. You see big increases in the late 90s, and then No Child Left Behind. You see a big increase in spending from the national government. Okay, with that money from the national government comes regulations. Okay, this is where we got into all this testing, guys. Okay, with No Child Left Behind, all these state assessments and that sort of thing where you guys are tested 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, 11th grade, and so forth. Okay. So those are mandated from the national government, and so the states have to do it, okay, to get the money. All right. This is a really good graph. Okay, so health programs and non-health programs. Okay, now this ends in 2011, 1941. Okay, what happened here in 1964? That started to create all this national funding to the states for health programs. What was created in 1964?
Reagan.
What?
Reagan Care.
Not Reagan Care. No.
Charity.
No.
I've never.
Is that a thing?
What?
Reagan Care?
I mean, like, that's what the Democrats call Obamacare, so.
Wow.
The 64 was Lyndon Baines Johnson. Okay. It wasn't Johnson Care. It was called Medicare. Medicare, which is supposed to help the elderly that are poor with health expenses. Okay. So that started in 1964. And you can see this is 2009 when we get Obamacare. Okay. So you see it kind of go shoot straight up. Okay. And then these are non-health programs. So you can see the federal government did very little. Okay. And then once we hit the 1970s, guys, everything starts going up. This is the Reagan era where we saw some of that come back down. Okay. But ever since then, it's risen. Yeah.
Why did Reagan have like all these go down?
Well, they tried to limit the amount of federal spending and the size and scope of government, because from the 60s, guys, with the Johnson presidency, they had the war on poverty. Okay, and the war on poverty created a bunch of new social programs and really expanded things like welfare. Okay, so we saw massive amounts of federal spending going to the states to fund those programs. Okay, there was pushback in the 1980s with Reagan. Okay, like, this is too much. We're spending too much. Okay. And we're still having these arguments today. Yes. Yeah.
What if instead of spending so much on helping poor people, the government supported working unions?
Okay, start over.
What if the government started supporting working unions instead of focusing so much on working the poor?
Working unions. What do you mean by that? Working unions, like?
As in, the people in the area get to unionize and decide on what they're going to do and be together and not accept wages below that.
Well, people are free to do that. As far as the government creating unions or enticing, I mean, they can encourage it, but I mean, that's something people have to do on their own. You know what I mean? Now, the federal government has a national minimum wage, and then states have the power to raise their minimum wage, and many do. Florida just voted to go to $15, the whole state. That was on the ballot Tuesday. Okay, it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Okay, now I want to point this out. Okay, this just shows the dependency. Okay, this is on average of what a state pays, or where it gets the revenue to spend the money it spends. Okay, so we go back to 2005, and guys, this is a short period of time here, to 2011. Okay, so about 40% of the money that states got, that they spent, came from general funds. That means when state of Kansas has an income tax, that's what we pay into. So, but they got about 40%. Today, that's about 36% of the money that Kansas spends comes from state income tax and other taxes. Okay. Then this one in blue is other funds. So where does the state get other money? Well, one of the big ones is the turnpike. Okay, you guys drive on the turnpike? Okay, I drive on it a lot. And so if I'm driving on the turnpike, it's going to cost me like $5 or $6 to go from here to Topeka. Okay, and people do that every day. You know what I mean? And so they get a lot of funds from that. They get it from, when you pay to go to the state parks and stuff like that. Okay, other fees, fishing licenses, hunting licenses, all that. So they get about 28% of the funding for that to spend. Well, guys, look at this. 34%, this is average of the 50 states. 34% of all the money that states spend, they get from the federal government. So what started with that crack that I just said here, taste this, see if you like it, okay, has become full-blown dependency on the federal government for their subsistence. Okay, we talk about dependency of an individual being dependent on each other or being dependent on a drug. Guys, the states cannot function without federal aid any longer. They are hooked, they are addicted, and really I don't see any way to get us off of that, okay, other than states demanding that they're allowed to keep more of their own money. Okay, and that would require us to cut taxes at the federal level with the knowledge that state taxes would rise. And states would have more of their own money to do the things that they want to do with it. Okay, but this is really moving us, when we talk about a federal system, to a unitary system. With this money comes rules, regulations, mandates that states must follow, which gives more control to the national government. Okay, I'll wrap up some of these ideas tomorrow, and I'll talk about the test. Okay, so hopefully that's like a shorter video, like 15-20 minutes. Okay, talk to you later.